Welcome to Restoring the Mind. My name is Khalid Mahmood. Today's topic is homeschooling, the best way to empower the brain. My guest this week is once again Thomas Pochari. He writes on World Affairs Monthly. Hi, Tom.
Hey, how you doing, Ken? I hope things are going well.
Okay, good. Thank you. You once told me that your children never went to school. You decided to educate them at home. So I'm going to start off with two questions. Right? Question number one: what made you choose this option? And question number two: when exactly did you decide that you will not send your children to state schools? I mean, were they kind of before their birth? Were they after the birth? Was it kind of when they were a couple of years old? I mean, when did you? What made you decide
Yeah.
it? What made you choose this option?
So the first question is how I came to this decision.
Yeah, what made you choose this option?
Okay, well, it's quite complicated, but I think I can do a good synopsis. So, and as usual, I'd like to go back in history and tell a little story. So I was always interested since I was a young boy. I was interested, keenly interested in human biology. In fact, not just human biology, but biology in general. Life in general, especially mammals, primates. Animals. I used to collect skeletons that in cemeteries of the owls would eat little rodents, and I would collect those things. And anyway, so I was just so interested in especially the brain and the mammal brain and how it developed and I was going to school, so I was sort of I was wasting my time. I knew I was wasting my time, and so I can't really say that I hated school, because in the first years it was okay. I did very well, and teachers were always saying I was the smartest guy in the class, all this kind of garbage. But as I grew older, probably around 12 years old, 11, 12 years old, I began to realize that there was something wrong, and that it didn't seem right that I had to go to school. And I mostly wanted to. It wasn't that I needed to play. I was playing a lot, as every child does, but play was important to me. But I wanted to be able to think what I wanted to think and analyze what I wanted to analyze. And in fact, you before the interview, before you turned the recorder on, you talked about self-direction. So I was just hyper keen on taking charge of my own destiny, my own development, and doing what I thought was the right thing. And my mother and father were kind of, pretty irritated by this. They didn't really understand what I was doing, and so what I'm trying to say is that I was actually going to the library. I grew up in Santa Clara County, which is not far from where Apple Computer now is. And in fact, Apple Computer was probably a couple of miles from my house, where they had the headquarters, and in the 70s, and Steve Jobs. So everybody knows where that is, and it's a pretty amazing place, because it has proved to be a kind of a center of innovative and forward-looking thinking about the world, both in terms of technology and even academia and theory. So I'm just the ultimate theoretician, in fact. So anyway, back to high school. I didn't really go to high school. I was really pretty angry that I had to attend high school. So I really didn't. I would go, and my father was at work. He worked at NASA, and I would go on my bike, usually to up the hill to Saratoga High School. And but my mother would be concerned if I came back home, which I wanted to do. But what I would do is go onto the campus, near downtown Saratoga, and I would hang out for a little while, maybe go to one class, and then I'd go to my take off and go on my bike, and I go to the library, Saratoga Library. And I would spend most of my time in high school at the Saratoga Library, or just kind of going around, and I ride my bike around and do stuff, sometimes play. But I go to bookstores that were in San Jose or Santa Clara. I ride my bike further off. But so generally speaking, I really didn't even attend Saratoga High School. And my mother and father were getting, well, especially my father was quite alarmed by this. And so, naturally he was alarmed. And one day, this was probably my junior year, I was called into the superintendent's office or the principal's office, the head guy at Saratoga High School, and my father was called in too. And they told me in no uncertain terms that I would be suspended if I didn't go to class and do my homework and be like everybody else. And I remember the day pretty well. It was kind of upsetting, but I wasn't too disturbed. And I said to the guy, I said, look, you tell me if I'm passing these exams that these teachers are giving. They give exams at the end or middle of the way of the class course or whatever. Taking the exams and passing them. Am I passing them? And he said, apparently you are, and meaning I'm getting a C or above. And so I said, well, you can do whatever you want, but I'm not going to school. As long as I pass these exams, you can't do anything to me. And I'm not going to say what in fact I did tell him. I actually said I used some expletives, but I told him, kind of politely, and I used it, and I said, go take a hike. And they said, we're going to suspend you. And I said, you can do whatever you want. And I left. And you know what? Months later, no suspension. So I graduated with a C average. But the point I'm trying to make is that I was keen on doing what I wanted to do, and clearly I wasn't any kind of dummy. And I was recognizing at early age that there was something wrong with going to school and forcing a youngster to get instruction. Now, since I had been interested in the brain, and I was even thinking of neuroscience at the time, getting a PhD or whatever, I was kind of idealistic about that. But so I went to Santa Clara University, and in fact, I went to West Valley Junior College first for 1 year, got straight A's. Then I went to Santa Clara University, and I went there because I had such poor grades, and I knew these big shot universities were not going to admit me, and my SAT scores were okay, but nothing special. So in fact, I kind of boycotted the SAT. I just closed my eyes and just scratched marks on it. So yeah, I didn't do very well. So I was sort of, I guess you could say, rebellious, but it wasn't really rebellion. Anyway, the argument I'm making to you right now, Khaled, is
Hmm.
that was the formative years of my life were telling me that there was something very wrong with our knowledge, our knowledge at the time and our knowledge now of human brain development or even mammal brain development. I had a strong feeling, intuition, or conviction that it really wasn't based on reality, and that most every. I'm just going to be. So this interview, I'm going to be really frank with you. I thought everybody was just, I'm sorry, I'm going to use the language here, full of shit. All right. I didn't respect them at all. I knew they were a bunch of scammers and stupid shit liars and bullshit artists. And, I mean, yeah, they were showing up to work, teachers, administrators, other people I would meet. But, they were all just a waste of time. It was just a total waste of time. So I get through Santa Clara University, and I fly through, hardly do any work, get C's, and I considered career, I mean, work in medicine, a medical doctor. But I said, Tom, you're way too smart. I'm sorry, I'm going to be boastful, but I said, I knew a bit about medical science, and I just said, there's no way I'm going to join the medical guild. Everybody in the audience probably knows what a guild is. They want to enforce the rules of the guild. They don't really care about what the guild's doing. They just want to make money and enforce the rules of the guild. All right. So I began, like I said, at an early age to understand there was something very wrong. So then I decided, probably around age 17 or 18, I said, okay, Tom, you're going to have to get really investigate this and find out what the hell's going on. And we did this pre-interview the other day, which we decided not to publish, but I'll tell the story again. I got my driver's license here in California at age 16 at Los Gatos in Los Gatos DMV. And I think one of the first things I did, I was so excited, I drove my car, Chevy Vega, use Chevy Vega up to Stanford University, where they have, of course, a medical school. And I went into the library. I could go in there freely. They weren't going to stop me. And I went into the library and I looked up. I spent days and days there, probably a total of 2 weeks, all in the afternoon, probably in the summertime. And I went there looking for information about sleep and what I call the sleep function in the mammal brain, and also the placebo effect, and in general, medical science in general, but especially if it pertains to the brain and the nervous system. And I began to understand that really nobody had any clue as to what the brain was actually doing during sleep. No one knew. And now there was some evidence though that and this was sort of a consensus, and I think it was a reasonable consensus, and it still is agreed upon, that rest is not what the brain is doing when you're sleeping, right? You feel rested in the morning, and that's a reward sensation. Like you're rewarded for getting glucose or sugar. You feel sweet in your mouth, right? But
Hmm.
that's a reward. That doesn't mean that okay, you see what I'm trying to say. So you feel better in the morning. Now if you don't feel good, that means you have not slept, where the slept function hasn't really been functional, and you're in trouble, and or you need more sleep. So I understood that, and I remember coming home and talked to my mother and father about it, and they were kind of perplexed, and they didn't really know. Yeah, they were just perplexed. So anyway, years go by, and I was at Santa Clara University, and I figured, okay, I'm going to take, I'm going to do. I'll repeat. I was at Santa Clara University. I was determined to study the brain and the mind, and the mind was especially important because the phenomenon of the mind is just mind-boggling, just to use a pun. And I was just interested in that because I knew that the human animal was really powerful because of the mind, because of the brain. All right, so I took 1 year. I figured, okay, maybe I'll do medicine, but I wasn't really that serious. I was taking all these science courses, biology, chemistry, the whole pre-med stuff. But I took 1 year of developmental psychology at Santa Clara University, and the professor was Mrs. Eleanor Williamson. Nice lady, and very good. And she was just teaching the standard stuff that they teach in developmental psychology. And I was looking at that. A lot of Harvard scholars were studying the child's brain and how they develop. It was a lot of psychology stuff, and I was okay with it, but it was pretty boring. And I went to Williamson one day, and I said, this is kind of boring stuff, but I didn't really focus on what was wrong. And she said, well, why don't you like it? And we had a discussion. I can't really remember what we said, but I kind of hinted at the fact that they're missing something. And what they're missing is what juvenile mammals do as when they're young, juveniles, and they play after birth. They begin playing, and they play until pretty much the time when they're ready to leave the mother and go off and be an adult and reproduce and survive in the wild, which is pretty challenging, and most of them don't survive. It's pretty tough. So they play, and I remember thinking, okay, there's sleep and there's play, and sleep is I noticed yesterday, Catherine, my wife, told me about a BBC article about infant sleep. They're probably referring to my work. I'm sure they are. They're trying to compete with us, Khaled. So they were. I can send you the article. They're going in detail about infants and their requirement for sleep. So, if for first couple of months, the first 6 months, the infant will sleep probably even 20 hours.
Hmm.
20 hours. So as the child grows up and develops, the brain develops, the sleep diminishes in time, but not that much. So for example, a 6-year-old may still need about 10 to 12 hours. Well, not 10, 12 hours sleep or even more. And even a teenager will sometimes sleep more than 12 hours if you allow the child to sleep. So we knew that back then, we knew that, and I said, all right, so this brain, I got into the fact that the brain is developing, right, building out. It's like a software build out, right? And I thought, well, okay, what is play? And I slowly grew to understand from my perspective as a biology scientist type guy, I slowly understood that play must be something very important. And I suppose it was about in my early 30s, I realized that play was likely, in my opinion, to be an augmentation of the sleep function. So the build out of the brain requires the juvenile mammal to play because sleep time is really insufficient. You know, you can't be sleeping all the time. In fact, BBC mentioned yesterday, the journalist mentioned that some babies might even sleep 20 hours. You know, that
Wow.
means 4 hours are not sleeping. Okay, so that's very difficult for the mother and father. Well, in terms of Homo sapien, it would be mother and father, but in terms of other mammals, it'd be just mother because the male doesn't hang around. So that's a lot of time sleeping, and it has to be important. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. So, and the play is also extremely dominant. So then I said, okay, Tom, if that's the case, if we're awake, but we're doing kind of a sleep thing while we're awake, we're awake and we're functional, but we're doing what we do during the sleep function, which is build out the brain. So it's an augmentation of sleep. And then I of course realized that if that's true, then what we're doing is damaging the brain, stunting its development, actually destroying its development by forcing cognition or exercising instruction or whatever you want to call it, making them do stuff with their brain before they're even ready to do it. It's a waste of time.
Hmm.
Yeah, total waste of time. Now, one might counter me and say, well, look, children learn a lot of languages. You know, they can learn anything. They're like a wet sponge that just absorb everything. No, that's not true. Yes, they learn languages very easily, but that's not well understood why. And yes, they can learn 4 or 5 languages, but it's a little confusing for them. But yes, languages, that's one thing. But everything else, knowledge, facts, information, I don't think they're really interested. In fact, you talk to most children, they'll tell you they have no interest in school, none.
Sure.
Yeah. Now, so then I was kind of put off by the fact that I was doing this and no one was listening to me or hearing what I was saying. And I shouldn't say I'm an angry person, but I've had to deal with this all my life. Where if you're a path breaker, and I mentioned Stephen Jobs and Apple Computer, all he was trying to do as a young man, and frankly, I didn't really
You know,
like.
you know what I think?
Yeah,
I
yeah. Tell
think
me.
uh, I think that when children are young, they are sent to school not for knowledge, but for conformity
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we talked about that. In
and
fact,
compliance.
well,
So
we talked about that in one of our previous interviews, Truth and
Mhm.
Who Controls the Truth, I think
Yeah,
September 3. And in the last 10 minutes, so it's indoctrination. It's like you're forcing the child to submit to some
yeah,
ideology, you're telling the child, okay, just shut up and do what I say.
yeah. They're removing the self-direction part of
Right.
the.
And when I first met you on the net in 2003, my initial reaction was, here's a young guy, you were 20 years younger at the time, and I'm thinking, well, this guy's Pakistani, born in Pakistan. You told me about your life, and I'm thinking, you're trying to recover yourself. You're trying to restore yourself because it had been effectively wiped out by the circumstances that you had to put up with. And I
Exactly.
think most children are like that. Now you talk about self-direction. Every individual, in fact, every living being, on this earth, every animal is, and in fact, the Pope, who is a Jesuit, Catholic Pope, said every child is every person is a child of God. He said recently. And that's an interesting way of looking at it because we are all precious in a sense. Yes, we're
Sure.
different. We might be pretty weird. I knew some weird kids in high school. They were one guy. There were guys who threw pennies at this guy, and he'd pick them up, and he didn't say anything for 4 years. I don't think I ever heard him speak one time. I have vague memories of it, but I had a lot of buddies who were kind of jokers, and they would throw pennies, and this guy would go around picking them up in the quad. and that's all he would do. And we never heard a word out of him. Yeah, pretty weird, right?
Yeah.
so so he would be considered a problem today and be sent to psychiatrists. But back then, he's just a weird guy, right? Autism, it may not be anything, a disorder. Maybe they're just unusual brains.
Hmm.
They're not fitting into the program, right? So I think there's a lot of excessive, um, what's the best word for it, scrutiny of brain development, and there's also excessive conformity, expectations of a conformity. For example, we're going to talk about my two sons, and I will later on, but they're very different, and I didn't have any role in this difference. They're just different. It's genetic, or maybe it's partly environmental. But back to your question about, let's see, what was it you said? Or indoctrination. So yes, school is not for informing the child or training the child or doing anything. It's just for basically beating them over the head and telling them to shut the fuck up, excuse my language, and to teach them to submit.
True.
So it's, but the fact is, science, or the science is a big word these days. Everybody's to follow the science. Well, the knowledge that we have of the brain is, in my opinion, totally just a bunch of BS. And I'm going to just come out and say it. Probably the only one in the world that is onto this is me. Now, there's another guy named Stuart Brown. He's an MD. You can look him up. Stuart Brown, Stuart Brown, and the National Institute of Play. Now, I won't go into details, but he's a friend of mine, and he, independently of me, came up with the same idea, but he thinks play should go on into adulthood. And I said, no, play is for the juvenile mammal brain. And when you're finished with development at age 25 for the human being, of 20 to 25, you stop playing, and then you get to work like Khaled Mahmoud's doing right now. He's working like hell, getting his ideas out there and telling the whole world what he thinks, his unique perspective. And that's what I think I need to emphasize. There is no more need for conformity. We're not going to factories. Yeah, the Chinese are doing the factory stuff for us because they're less developed. But most of the Western world is not in a factory any longer. And we don't need to pretend like we're just a bunch of robots. We're not. We're like the Pope, and I don't really like the Catholic Church too much, but the Pope's a Jesuit, and I went to Jesuit school, so I mean, the Pope's kind of funny. He's a socialist and a communist and everything, but still, he said we're all children of God. So respect the children.
Hmm.
Ask them what they think. Now, they are beasts. They are animals. You can't reason with them. Okay, fine. You have to be understanding, but they're unique little creatures, and they have to be respected. They must be respected. And if you do, when they're older, they're gonna be pretty pleased about that.
True.
So I think we need to emphasize it's not homeschooling that we need to aspire to. It's what John Holt, and I explain who he is. John Holt coined the term unschooling. And this was
Hmm.
back in the 70s, probably. John Holt, Holt. Look him up on the internet. They destroyed his life because he didn't want to go along. And I said yesterday in our pre-interview, pretend interview, I said he started to question the validity of instruction for youngsters because he was a teacher himself, an instructor at little elite prep schools in I think in the Boston, Massachusetts area, for the rich and famous people, for rich people there, and he was noticing how difficult it was to get any of the youngsters to pay attention and to actually learn something and take the knowledge and show that they understand. They didn't want it. It was a bunch of waste of time. He said they were all bullshitting around. So,
True.
so he wrote books. I didn't know he existed in the 60s because I went to school. I was told that, but he was sort of a cult figure. And what's interesting is that the first people to appreciate what he was saying, I think, were high income people, hippie types, or people who, like you and I, who would question authority and question what knowledge we indeed have. This kind of person. So it was it was taking off in some, in the 70s, that people did spend time looking at Holt and reading his books. His books are still in print, and I recommend every single one of them. And but the first group that really took on to what he called homeschooling, but he wanted to unschool. He wanted no instruction whatsoever, and he coined that term, unschooling. And I understand from someone nearby, living nearby to me, that this woman told me that unschooling is taking off at the moment. It's in California, maybe even Northern California, is growing about 15% a year. And homeschooling, since the late 70s or 80s, it's grown about 3 or 4% a year, or 5% a year at the most. And the first group that really did it, in fact, I think there's maybe 7 or 8 million homeschooled children in the United States. And the first group who really was dominant were Christian fundamentalists. Now, the reason they didn't like schools because they found out that their children were being taught this Ashkenazim, and I'm just going to be blunt, it's Ashkenazi Jewish stuff. The children are taught about sodomy, about oral sex at age 8. Come on. Now they're even taught about transgender, and it's incredible. You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm listening.
So they didn't like that because they were religious, like you are. You're a Muslim. They didn't like that. They had their moral code, and they pulled their children out of school. And at first, the state didn't like it, and it went to the courts. But the courts generally ruled in favor of the parents if they would have responsibility for their children. So then they agreed, okay, there would be instruction at home, and the parents would be in charge of that. Now, okay, so that's homeschooling. But in fact, the real movement is unschooling, because
Hmm.
children want to play, and there's more respect for children. There's more knowledge and understanding. And I wouldn't be surprised that I'm really kind of the pathbreaker here. And I'm not famous in the sense you see my name in the media, but I think my influence is fairly large, and that it's taking off for this reason. So the fundamental principle I want to leave everybody today is that there is no reason why the brain can tolerate instruction. There's no need for it. The brain is augmenting the sleep function when it does play, and when it does play, it's in the juvenile mammal, and play is pretty much every time the child wakes up until the child goes to sleep. That's play. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's it. The second question was when? Yeah. So
When?
when did I decide to keep my children at home?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I was married. I met my wife in Paris while I was a journalist in Paris in 1984. I was a journalist till brief time, and then I decided I wanted to be independent, and I would never work for a newspaper again. And so I kind of struggled, to survive, but I managed it. I met my wife in 1987, I think in May 1987 in Paris, France, and within 2 years we were married. And in the first 10 years of life, she went to George Washington University and got a Bachelor of Arts in history, summa cum laude or magna cum laude, whatever it was. You're a very, very, very smart woman. But we traveled around the world for about 10 years overland. In the course of 10 years, we traveled all over the place and all over the world. And we had that opportunity, and it was great. But so probably I'm going to say, I don't remember exactly when it was, but I probably figured that I would not. So I was definitely had this theory in my head when I was in about 1990 to 1993 or something like that. I was, my children were born in, first one was born in 2000. So this is a good 10 years before. But now you asked me if I told Catherine, and I didn't. I did not, but we discussed everything. But I didn't really feel a need to tell her that. She knew all about my theories. But then when the time came to have children, I said we're not going to send them to school, and she was a little perplexed by that, but just a little bit. She was a little apprehensive, but I said no, and we're not going to even register them. No homeschooling. We're done. We're not even going to tell the authorities. Fuck. They can fuck off as far as I'm concerned. So we just kept them at home, and thank goodness we had enough resources to keep them at home. And Catherine took care of them 24/7, and it was fantastic. All they did was play
Hmm.
until they were 14. Christoph is the only one born in 2000, January 2000, and he was playing and pretty much till 14 nonstop. And then he starts little intellectual work, and he was on the net. He had his own computer, and I didn't tell him what to do. If he wanted to look at, sex sites, he could. I didn't tell him. He's welcome to look at it. I'm sure he did. But he's an extraordinary young man, and he's an inventor, scientist, and engineer, and he's got patents. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised that in a couple of years he actually does a corporation, forms a corporation, and does an IPO, initial public offering, and for a research and development corporation. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm sure. I bet you. I predict within a couple of years, 5 years, whatever, he'll be doing that. So he'll be in his mid 20s, or 26, 27 when he does that. It's possible, quite likely. The younger one is Sebastian, and he was born in March 2003, and he's called an astonishingly high aptitude helicopter pilot. So he was about 14, and he started, working, he was flying aircraft with a simulator on his computer, which he made himself. He made a big computer, one of these big computers himself, and he did that. He was flying aircraft. About 2 years before he actually flew a helicopter for the first time at age 16, I think 15 and a half, he started flying helicopters, and he just received his commercial helicopter license, which means that he can fly for a business, and he's going to get his instructor's license any day now. He's been hired at the local airport helicopter school, and he's going to be a flight instructor there.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a good
Yeah,
news.
and but the
Congratulations on the passing of
well,
his exams.
it is wonderful, and I thank you for saying that, because I look at all these other young people. I
Ye-
go out from time to time. I talk to people, and I look at the young people, and they're all suffering, Kai.
Sure.
They're
Well,
suffering, and then, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, you can carry on. You're talking about the
Well, it
suffering.
breaks your heart, because I mean, I'm not really one of these bleeding heart liberals. In fact, I'm right wing. I mean, maybe even extreme right. But I look at, yeah. I've always appreciated children. I always thought children were wonderful, and I just get so angry when I see this destruction of the brain, child's brain. It's a destruction of the child's brain. They are not able to do what they are, and again, I say God. I don't know if I believe in God, probably not, but the Pope would say God has something for them to do, and they're not really able to do
So you link that to the school.
that. Well, the school is a complete waste of time, and not only that, it's destroying the development of the child's brain. I got to emphasize again, the child is not cognitive. Yes, they can learn
Hmm.
language, but you don't reason with the child. I have personal experience. I know you don't have children, but you know what the children are like, because your brothers and sisters have children, right? So
Yes,
you're around children, so you know what children are like. You're not going to reason with them. They're
sure.
like little. They're like, more often than not, they're like little monsters. Now,
Hmm.
they're not bad. I'm not saying they're bad, but they're monsters.
No, I call them angels.
Okay, angels. That's better. Yeah, they're like angels, but I don't think you could, if you allow them to be children, they're going to be very difficult. The adult wants the child to do what the adult wants them to do, right? And
Hmm.
there's a constant conflict. If the child want to go out and dig a big hole in the backyard and look for insects, and he wants to run around and do weird stuff, crazy stuff, and you really do have to let children do that.
Sure.
So I think it's really tragic that we're not, the Guild, the University of California, San Francisco, they have a big neuroscience. I call them, but they don't respond. They know damn well I'm right. I redefined what epilepsy is. They don't want to talk to me. They probably think I'm right. Anyway, so it's always like this. Alexander Fleming was a let's see, I guess he was a medical doctor. I'm not sure. I can't remember now, but he was a British guy, in London, and in I think around 1900. Alexander Fleming was the inventor, discoverer of penicillin,
Mhm.
antibiotic. And he was, figuring, okay, there's something killing bacteria, and he wanted to figure it out. And he did finally. He stumbled across it. It was kind of a fancy word, serendipitous. I can't remember exactly what year, but well before World War I. And he figured he had something there, and everybody ignored him, just totally ignored him. And then I was thinking in the 30s or in the 40s or even later in the 50s, he was his paper on he wrote a scientific paper that was published, and it was kind of rediscovered and reread by some guys at University of Cambridge University, and they were interested in him, and they realized, hey, this is right, so they replicated this that work, and then he got a Nobel Prize. But for decades he was ignored.
Sure.
So it
Going
just,
back, going
yeah,
back to
yeah,
the subject again. Okay.
yeah,
Your son's right, because let's look on the other side of the side.
yeah.
Your sons never actually went to school, so they never actually competed with other children either. They
That's
never
right.
met other children,
That's right. They
but
were totally isolated.
they never socialized with anybody.
No, and I did that deliberately. And I think I mentioned in our pre-interview that I was opposed. I've written an article about this, which I will publish at bottleneckanimal.com. So all my science ideas are at bottleneckanimal.com, and it's just starting. I'm getting started, so you got to be patient with me. It'll be up and running pretty well pretty soon. But it's up there now. But it's just, there's not much stuff up there, information. But peer pressure is very risky, very damaging, very harmful to the child.
Hmm.
And we all know why, right? Okay, so then the second thing I want to mention is that Khaled Mahmoud or Tom Pochari or all these children, my sons, your brothers and sisters' children, they are unique creatures. They're children of God. Well, they're unique. They need to be they need to be who they are. They don't
True,
need to be somebody else. So
true.
so if you're socializing, you're okay. There's some conformity that's necessary, but I think the brain wants to be built out in a unique way. That's it. Maybe I'm kind of crude in expressing this, but you follow what I'm saying?
Hmm.
It's uniqueness. In fact, I should tell you that everybody probably knows there's about 100 billion neurons in the brain, and there's maybe at least 100 billion, maybe 500 billion glial cells, which is the connective tissue called the white matter around the brain. The gray matter is the neurons, and then every neuron in the cortex has about between 100 or 10, 20, 30, 100, or maybe even 10,000 connections to neighboring neurons. But in the cerebellum, which is in the inside of the brain, the core of the brain, and it has a density of neurons like 4 times greater than the cortex. Uh, so most of the neurons per square inch are in the cerebellum, and the cerebellum has synapses, which is connections to other neighboring neurons, sometimes as many as 100,000.
Hmm.
Well, all of these connections have to be made. Now, each neuron in the brain, apparently, they've realized in the past 10 years or so, they realized that each neuron has DNA which is unique. It's not like the rest of the cells in the body, which have all the same DNA. It's
Hmm.
unique. So if you add up the possibilities, you've got about 4 quadrillion or some insane number. I don't even think anybody can conceive of it. The possibilities for connections is in the quadrillions,
Hmm.
and that is being built out in the first 25 years of life.
True.
and it continues to be built out as you age.
True.
So I figure that that is taking place during sleep, and in the juvenile mammal, that's taking place augmented by sleep by the play function. So there you have it. And now I was friends with a very famous neuroscientist named Marion Diamond, and I
Okay.
mentioned her before to you. Yeah, so look her up, Marion, Marion Diamond. She's considered at Wikipedia there to be one of the founders of modern neuroscience. So she and I were friends, and she was pretty flabbergasted by my theories, and she said, "Oh my goodness, Tom, this is going to be," and she kind of hinted that I would get the Nobel Prize eventually.
Okay.
Yeah. But I don't. I want to make an important point. Never once did I seek glory, fame, money. I've
Hmm.
never been interested in that. Never. Now that sounds kind of weird. People are probably put off by that, but it's a true statement. I am not motivated by that. In fact, I'm turned off by it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But back to the topic again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What difference do you see between yourself at that age and your children? How, when they were growing up or when you were growing up, what difference did you see between you went to the state school and they
Yeah.
did not?
Yeah.
So, so how do you compare the two?
That's an excellent question. I'm going to say that they are so much more. I told you this already. They are so much more advanced than I was at the same age,
Hmm.
and also they are happier. They are very self-fulfilled. I don't know the adjectives. They're the what Abraham Maslow, probably a Jewish guy. Abraham
Yeah.
Maslow. What is it? He
The
wasn't
hier
he?
the
Yeah,
hierarchy guy.
yeah, the hierarchy. So
The-
so they have a very high level of satisfaction and happiness. And I don't know about happiness, but gratification. Sebastian is so pleased. I mean, he's 19 years old. Yes, he's 19 years old, and he's the youngest guy there, and they all look up to him, and he's the best pilot around, and it's amazing, right? You can't see a guy, you can't find a guy happier than he is. Yeah, and not just happy. Happy's not the right word. Fulfilled, or and he has his destiny. He's persevered. He's done it all on his own. I never told him what to do. He did everything on his own.
That's good.
And
Okay.
same with Christoph.
Okay.
So I think that the main difference is that they have the internet, which is just a huge, powerful gift, just the most enormously powerful tool that you can imagine, and they have access to the whole world and access to all the information they want, and they can sit at that computer and do whatever they want. They can find whatever information they want. Yes, it's difficult to use, but still, so they have this amazing aptitude to understand the world, and they are so thrilled to get up in the morning and do it. And where I was at the same age, boy, I was pretty angry. I was
Hmm.
pissed off 24/7 because people were telling me what to do. All these idiots in schools and professors and politicians, everybody's kind of they're all losers. They're just a bunch of imbeciles. And I didn't want to have anything to do with them. And people in my family were telling me what to do. Everybody's telling me what to do. And I was given fairly. I shouldn't say it was that bad, but I my family was good. It was good, but still, I suffered because I had to put up with all that garbage,
Hmm.
and they don't.
Okay. My final question. Homeschooling is not everybody's cup of tea, as you may understand.
Sure.
So, what would you advise your listeners?
Well, again, I go back to my first statements about homeschooling. I think if you're going to have children, and you got to treat these, if you believe in God or not, the Muslim God, Jewish God, whatever, monotheistic, or if you're not even religious, you have to understand that these are precious, like you said, Khaled, they're angels, and you have to provide them the environment or the place so they can flourish. And if you send them to the school, which is now in the United States mostly run by Ashkenazis, the school system is so totally controlled by Ashkenazis at the universities, yeah, the whole thing, and so you're going to basically subject them to indoctrination, Ashkenazi indoctrination. They're going to have to love Israel. They're going to have to learn about the Holocaust. They teach about the Holocaust anyway. So what I would tell them to do is, I would advise them to look into what I say. I'm going to eventually put up all the information at bottleneckanimal.com. They can examine it. They can check it out for themselves. And if they have the capacity or the ability to take their children out of school, they take them out of school and bring them home. And if the grandmother can take care of them, whatever, someone in the family, that'd be great. And just let them play and just let them do whatever they want to do.
Okay.
Let them do whatever they want to do. Now, if they got little problems, or they maybe you fear that they have a disability or whatever, okay. And if they're kind of rambunctious, the males have to be supervised a little bit more closely. They require supervision, of course, but they should feel free to do whatever they want to do and to think whatever they want to think. And as their brain develops, they will become incredibly astute. They will talk to you like they were adults, and you will be astounded. And you'll look back and on this interview, and you'll say, "Yeah, this guy Tom really helped me." So I think that's what I recommend. Now, instruction is a waste of time. They're going to forget all of it. So don't even teach them languages. Expose them to languages. I think that would be very good. The Arabic, and not many people speak Arabic. It's probably not that important language, but English and of course even Mandarin. Maybe it might be useful to learn Mandarin and Spanish, Spanish, English. Why not? And Urdu or whatever. But you could learn a couple of languages like that as a youngster, and that would be very useful.
Okay.
And it doesn't require instruction. All it requires is somebody talking to them.
True. True.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we'll leave everything today at this. It's already
Okay,
been about
great.
45 minutes.
Oh,
Thank you
good.
very much, Tom, once again.
Yeah.
And it was very informative. And thank you for sharing your personal life experiences
Yeah.
as well. Okay.
I'm grateful that you called me.
Okay.
Okay.
No problem.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Look forward to your another interview again.
Yeah.
Bye.